After these last days of playing at being abstruse, or you might say playing with the mind, perhaps it's time to get a little technical or a little scientific, you might say. First, there's a Zen story about a monk who went to the Zen master, Fu Shin, and he asked the master, "Master, what is the meaning of the Dharma?" And without saying a word, Master Fu Shin merely held up his fan. Now the monk did not understand what this meant, so he took his leave of Master Fu Shin, and he made his way to another Zen master, Mutsu. And Mutsu, when he was greeting the monk, said, "Oh, where have you come from?" And of course the monk answered and said, "I've just come from Master Fu Shin." "Oh, how was he? How did you find him?" And the monk answered, "Well, all was well with him." And so the master asked him, "Well, why did you leave?" And the monk said, "Well, I asked him the question, what is the meaning of the Dharma? And he didn't answer me, he just held up his fan." And so the master said to the monk, "When you were traveling here, did you pass through towns where you saw people going about their business?" The monk said, "Yes." "Well, did you pass fields where the animals were following their nature?" "Yes," said the monk. "And did you pass through the forest where you heard the sounds of the running stream and the wind rustling the trees?" "Yes," said the monk. And so the master said, "And there was no question that you understood the Dharma inherent in those experiences. So why then have you not understood the Dharma implicit in the raising of the fan?" "Oh," said the monk, "now I understand. Now I must return to Master Fu Shin to apologize to him." But as the monk was leaving, the master shouted at him, "The whole universe is the I. Where are you going to squat?" And with that, not only did the monk have understanding, but he had a realization. And then there's a story that we can call a Sufi story, perhaps. And it's about that King Akbar. And King Akbar gathered around him all manner of people, scholars and poets and musicians, all from different persuasions and different nationalities. He prided himself on the diversity of his court. But then one day a stranger came to the court, who it was found seemed to speak all the languages. Not only did he speak the languages, but he was so fluent in them that those of those nationalities who spoke to them could not tell whether he came from that place or not. And so one day, King Akbar, being very inquisitive about this, asked him, "Well, where do you come from?" And The stranger, being a little bit cheeky, said, "That is for me to know and you to find out." So, of course, King Akbar went to his loved and trusted advisor, Birbal, and he said, asked Birbal, "Well, Birbal, where does this stranger come from?" And Birbal said, "Well, I've been observing him, but I need a little more time. I'll tell you tomorrow." But that night, Birbal took a servant, and with him they crept into the stranger's bedchamber. And while he was sleeping, they dropped a few drops of water on his face. And so the stranger immediately mumbled something. And so Birbal and the servant left. And in the morning, when the court had assembled, King Akbar said, "Well, what is the answer?" And Birbal was able to say to this king, "This stranger came from India." And the stranger was absolutely astonished. "How did you know?" And Birbal said, "Well, it is well known that if we are startled, or if we get some kind of shock, we will revert to our origins. This is how the place from which you came has been ascertained." So, not to ask what is the meaning of these stories, but to ask what is our experience, what is the difference between the Zen stories that are like koans that trip up the mind with the possibility of bringing a realization or an awareness, and maybe the Sufi stories that are convoluted and bring the mind inward, so that the mind has to delve into its depths with the possibility of arriving at our essence, at truth perhaps. And we can recognize that every experience we have is a story. What has been the difference or the similarity between the Zen stories in our life that have tripped up our mind like something coming out of left field and now saying, "Well, where the hell did that come from?" Or the Sufi stories that can be circuitous and convoluted, but take the mind inward to delve down to discover some kind of reason or truth. What's the difference or the similarity for us between those Zen stories and the so-called Sufi stories? The Zen experiences that trip us up, come out of left field. Not to be explained by the mind. the Sufi stories. They take us inward to explore, to tremble at depth. And since it's been said before, we have to become divine physicists, divine scientists, and divine alchemists. Perhaps we can use our abilities in each of these spheres to reach some kind of knowing. But in the meantime, what will you use to answer this question?
Your own direct experience. The Zen story, it feels like an immediate cutting because it's not in the normal realm of understanding, so you're immediately suspended and it works its way without the mind being able to grasp anything because it's like an immediate slicing. Whereas, the Sufi story, it's so clever in that it entices, for me anyway, in a almost like a heartfelt way that gradually takes you inward and leaves you resting inwardly and still arriving at the same place.
Right.
As the slicing.
Yes. Thank you.